Hello, everybody, and welcome to the as yet unnamed Miguel Delaney, Adam Clery podcast. I am Adam Clery. This is Miguel Delaney. Miguel, how are you?
Good, thanks. I suppose we'll be better now. It's also not just Miguel Delaney, Adam Clery, but also The Independent.
Yes, The Independent.
Podcast.
The Independent
We probably
football.
aren't going to call it that, though, are we?
No, as yet unnamed. We can toy with anything between now and this actually getting published. It may have a name by the time you've clicked on it, but at the time of us recording this, we are yet to fully settle or receive important emails about the name. So we're going with as yet unnamed. We're going to bring some insight and we're going to bring some brevity, and hopefully that's worth 30 minutes of your ear time. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why have they put these two together? The man who wrote possibly the most seminal book on the world of football, geopolitics and socioeconomics and economic socio things, and the guy who plays with Subbuteo toys while explaining Arsenal's out of possession structure. It's giving buddy cop comedy.
Both sides of the game.
Yeah, both sides of the game. You're going to get a bit of everything. And we're starting today with the Premier League because you wanted to talk about that because you think it's been a bit of a weird season for the Premier League.
I suppose the title race to the on-pitch action to where the Premier League is, which I think is in a slightly strange place at the moment.
When you say strange, though, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, I suppose, put bluntly, as I wrote in a piece for The Independent this week, there might be a lot of this in terms of as we feed back.
We have things to plug.
Yeah. I mean, look, the Premier League, as we know, never been more popular, given you only look at the broadcast revenue, the interest. And it's almost like because of that popularity, it's never had more problems. I mean, we're in this era now where it has this, like, you can see it in the headlines all the time now. It's characterized by this infighting, constant headlines about PSO or financial issues or ownership. And it's just at a point now where like people are like, when you speak to people within football about it, they're constantly going about one of the problems in what is still the most popular league in the world, and actually at this point one of the most successful sports competition brands that has ever existed, which actually isn't anyway an exaggeration.
Can I just for a second pop my contrarian hat on here? I agree with you absolutely. It's never felt like more of a soap opera.
Yeah.
Right? But people love soap operas. We love the drama.
Yeah.
We love it when it gets really messy. Do you think there's any sort of argument that like that's why it's never been this popular? The more it goes down this sort of like freak show route where we're having to learn about how economics works just to understand why teams can't buy big players anymore. There's so much drama and we get so much of the insight into players' lives through their social media accounts and when they're posting things they shouldn't be, when they're falling out with their teammates or their managers. Is there an element that like that's kind of what's driving another increase in popularity?
I think it definitely helps to generate the noise. Mm-hmm. I still think there's a crucial remove between that and what we'd really love, which is basically managers and players great games and managers and players going at each other. And like just two examples that immediately popped into my mind there. Obviously, the one that has basically created the Premier League's legacy, really. Or really it's kind of its sense of narrative, which was, I will love it if we beat them. But also, if you remember, the one between Jose Mourinho and Antonio Conte a few years ago. And this was, of course, all on the back of genuinely exhilarating football.
Yeah, we love that stuff.
But I know exactly what you're getting at with these kind of off-pitch stories. But the issue there is, it's potentially feeding into something bigger. And that is the idea of whether fans will feel they can... Look, I mean, we're going to come to this at the end, but it's worth saying it now. So we are still awaiting an outcome of the Manchester City case.
Yes.
There is at least a possibility that, and if City insist on their innocence, there is at least a possibility, though, that this could potentially rewrite 15 years of football history, or at least completely change the perception of it. I think that it feels like all of these issues are building up to this. And it may be that feeling that where fans will wonder, certainly like it's almost like what happened to the Serie A at the point when it was like the strongest league in the world by far. That wasn't done by Calciopoli. Mm-hmm. There is at least a possibility of similar with the Premier League now. And this question then, if fans can feel they can trust what they see in the pitch. I mean, like, 'cause this is another angle we can go down in terms of this season. Like, how close are we to a Premier League club challenging a refereeing decision in court?
Well, I've got a question then. How close are we to a Premier League club challenging a referee decision in court? Because it feels very close. It feels like that's the only option they haven't exhausted yet.
Yeah. I mean, it's something executives throw around in, like, well, behind closed doors all the time. Yes.
This actually gets talked about.
Oh yeah, completely. Yeah. You know,
This is why Clattenburg did Gladiators, to get out the firing line.
Well, I mean, I think Mark Clattenburg likes a certain. I mean, he said a firing line. I think he likes the.
Because he was at Forest, he was like referee consultant for Forest, which everybody thought this is the craziest thing in the world. But that sort of felt like it was setting Forest up to be in a position where if they ever did want to go outside the normal bounds of complaining about decisions, they had a member of staff on the books who was there to sort of advise.
It was certainly a distinctive move. I think with Clattenburg, really, though, it's about he likes the glamour, doesn't he? Or he likes that kind of focus.
Well, as someone who was there on the sofa 5:45 every Saturday night on BBC One, I can tell you there is no glamour like the Glads, and he is an intrinsic part of that.
Yeah. And as we saw recently with that story he had that went viral about Jurgen Klopp, not sure that necessarily reflected all that well in him, but anyway.
He loves it. He just but again, that's more drama. That feeds into it. Like, we love that kind of thing. You're saying that you think we might actually be close to a Premier League team, though, taking a referee to court?
I think certainly it's being with the way lawyers have come to dominate Premier League meetings, and this is another aspect of this, with the way some clubs have spoken to PGMOL about decisions. I think at the very least at the moment, it's almost like the threat is kind of just not outright stated, but it's being left there. And given the way ownership is going, I think it's closer to the table than it's ever been in football history. In fact, because really, let's be fair, this is something that just wouldn't have been considered for 90 to 120 years of football. But now as we move into this era, especially where kind of the very authority of the competitions are being challenged.
What item near to you right now is the correct distance away from that table for how close this is? The audience can see, because like if it's that trophy behind you, it's miles away, right? What is it? Is it your knee?
Maybe my laptop.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is okay. This is I'm taking this as read in that case. But we're talking about the Premier League season primarily. It's been a weird season. I think you wanted to touch on sort of like there's a bit of a void in terms of the news because the title race was decided seemingly so early on.
Yeah.
But I would sort of argue from the other side. I've never felt like the Champions League places, that sort of like, mythologized, that's as good as winning something. That's never felt as wide open to me as it has this season. So does that give us a bit of a weird season where like the actual prize is gone and now we've got 8, possibly 10 teams all feel like they can get a piece of like the runner-up prize?
To a degree, but I think that's reflective of where the Premier League's going in some ways as well. I mean, like the two main ones, the title, we've known really that since January. Relegation is actually, it felt like it's been
the last couple of game weeks for me. It's sort of there was an element of like, could Ipswich are playing well and Wolves aren't getting clear with them, but the Wolves have been on a fantastic run since then. That feels done now.
Yeah, exactly. And like I suppose they're two very tangible things. You win it, you lift it, you're the champions, or you go down. Whereas Champions League, as good as it is for a club, obviously, as much as kind of the romance of getting into the Champions League, that music, it's still not the same sense of kind of something happening. Also, this season it's going to be tempered by the fact it could well be 5 teams. In fact, it's almost certain to be 5 teams.
I will say though, like I get it that it's like you're not winning anything. It's sort of like a false sort of accomplishment. If you're Bournemouth or you're Brighton or you're Forest, any of those teams, I can promise you, it will not feel like enough. That's huge for them.
It's huge, but I suppose it's still not quite what the Premier League sells us on, especially given at the moment. I mean, to add yet another strand to this, the Premier League feels not quite in it's not at war with UEFA. Absolutely nothing close to that. Not in the way FIFA are at war with UEFA, but there is a rising tension between what the Premier League is and what the Champions League is becoming, and especially with the way the ECA, who are basically the body that represents European clubs, who now pretty much work in tandem with UEFA in terms of kind of running the Champions League, because the view among the Premier League, among many clubs, is that ultimately they want a parallel league that will encroach onto the power of the Premier League. So it's interesting. It's quite an irony that it's this that is actually enlivening the Premier League season.
So the tension between sort of the Champions League and the Premier League, you would say that's actually coming more from the expansion of the Champions League. Feels like it's eating too much into domestic football.
Oh, completely. I mean, if you look at this season, and there's an interesting one there. So for the last 15 years, sorry, up until 2008, there's only been one club that had done a treble in one of the 5 major leagues. That was Manchester United '99. Since 2008, it's been 6 in 6 trebles in 16 years.
Is that right?
Yeah. Which is, and I think there's all sorts of reasons for that, for like the rise of super clubs, concentration of wealth. But if you look at what's been interesting this season now, and I'm not saying this is a solution to financial disparity because it's not, but it has had this effect. Suddenly you've got the major clubs where they would have been used to an easy January, say, the Premier League up until recently had this winter break. Suddenly they're playing 2 extra games in extra European games. It also goes quite late into December. They've got to fit games around that. And I think that is a direct cause of so many injury crises in a lot of the major clubs. All of England's Champions League participants have had them. Real Madrid have had an injury crisis. And I wonder, will that bring us back, temporarily at least, to an era where it's very difficult to kind of play on 2 fronts in that way? Because if you remember, after the last Champions League expansion in 99, when it went to 32 teams, squads couldn't cope for years. And like that, for about 7 years, that was characterised by a lot of teams who finished 4th and 5th, including Liverpool, including Milan, including Real Madrid, winning the Champions League, and title winners actually being far away. Anyway, that's another tangent.
That's one for another time.
I mean, that should be a name for the show, Tangents.
Tangents. I always think
but it's just on that. I think the Premier League, it's very conscious of how the Champions League isn't this extra competition anymore. It's now almost a parallel league. And one of the next big fights in football about all this sort of stuff is actually going to be the Champions League wanting to play at weekends, because that's kind of sacred domestic space at the moment. Yeah.
How far away is that?
That given there's so much politics to that, but that's also.
Is it realistic?
Again, that's almost a topic for another show, because we get into the direction of where football's going with the Club World Cup and that. But this is relevant to what we're talking about in terms of kind of the strength of the Premier League. But obviously we've been putting this throughout the last 20 years in terms of the Premier League versus a league or a Serie A, what's the best. It feels like we're getting to a point, and if you talk to people in football, they'd say the same thing, where really La Liga, Serie A, the Bundesliga, they're too far behind now. But the main competitor of the Premier League might be whatever the Champions League becomes, which is a properly globalised competition, and one, potentially, that is increasingly played in America as well.
I know this is all sort of relevant, but it does feel we're at a stage now where just the amount of good teams in the Premier League is absolutely insane. Like, you see like Villa going into the Champions League, not considered one of the really big clubs, and they hold their own against whoever they play against. Newcastle last season. Very unlucky not to get out of what was considered this astonishing group of death against established European sides. But yet we don't really see, like, they all compete, but I can't remember the last time where we got to the latter stages of a Champions League, for example, and it felt like Premier League teams had dominated that competition.
That's it. I think absolutely what we're touching on, you're absolutely right. And I think there's a real danger this season, like, given what Villa and Arsenal aren't favourites in their ties. Paris Saint-Germain probably expected to beat Villa. Interesting dynamic there with Emery going back, given his experience at Paris Saint-Germain. Arsenal, no matter how they're looking at the moment, and obviously they've had their own injury issues, they're playing Real Madrid.
I think Arsenal have got a better chance than people are giving them. But they will do well to get through that. That'll be a huge performance on their part. They're certainly not favourites.
Yeah, and it's almost like they've got to get over the aura of Real Madrid as much as anything before they actually play them.
And the injuries that you've already mentioned. Yeah. They're going to have a back four put together with glue and sticky tape by the looks of it.
Exactly. But on that, it does feel a little bit like, to touch on exactly what you're saying, the Premier League, because that point about how it's got so many good teams, I mean, that's an inevitability, because the Premier League is now the global Super League. Like, Brentford were able to offer Christopher Azure more than Milan were, and this is 3 years ago. Like, and if you think about, to anyone looking at that from the vantage point of football history, like Milan other than Real Madrid, were traditionally the club most associated with glamour, with stars, with that kind of aura than anyone else. And for like Brentford, who barely been in the top flight for most of their history, to be able to offer more. That just shows what the Premier League power is. I think it's created this. Obviously, most of the best managers attract to the Premier League. You've got this real concentration of quality in terms of squad, and what that has done, I suppose, and it's almost like this has been distilled into this Champions League race this season, where some of that strength and depth is being seen, even if it hasn't come into the title race in the same way. But also because I think this is always an interesting when you get into kind of what league is good and what isn't. So say like for a decade, La Liga was probably undeniably really the best in the world, but there still felt like there was that massive gap between the top two and the rest. Whereas the Premier League, I think, has a much steadier gradient. So like the 8th place team will give the 1st place team or second place team potentially more of a game than is necessarily true in Spain or in Germany, given Bayern's power, or Serie A. So that makes, I think, that intensity, and also actually the intensity of the way it's played.
Do you think this is a bad thing? Because the other way of looking at this is if you look at the Premier League's like big clubs, like the marquee franchises, the teams that give them this global appeal, it's bad for them. It's too many games. Bodies physically can't handle it. They're going to come into all this conflict. But again, I think if you look at the table this season, Forest, Bournemouth, Brighton, Newcastle, no European football for them. And they've been able to compete so well with those teams, basically because of the lighter schedule. They're effectively only playing one league when the top sides are effectively playing two. Chelsea looked for a long part of the start of the season like they were really back as a force, and they were basically resting their entire first-team squad through Europe at the start of the season. Is there almost an argument that this is terrible for the players, could be terrible for the product, but it actually makes it a bit more fun?
I think it's a temporary positive solution because, you're absolutely right. Football is really, it's built on variety, vitality, competitive balance, the idea that more teams should be able to win. That's what it should be about. But I think if that is dependent on an absolutely packed schedule, A, it's unsustainable, and players will eventually, something has to give there. And B, well,
it's the hamstrings that are giving it the minute.
Yeah. And B, what's the actual response to that going to be? Well, probably the wealthiest clubs are going to start agitating about this, push for bigger squad limits, push for PSO restrictions, and then you have the same problem sort of going round and round. Because, that's the other side to this. I do think, for all the criticism of PSR, and I think I actually have no issue with PSO. I think the issue is more the other side of it, how it's not complemented by a mechanism to help more clubs be closer in finance. But for the moment, I think, whereas yes, it means a strand of clubs can never spend as much as the wealthiest clubs, it's also stopped the wealthiest clubs being able to spend what will actually make the other clubs move. So hence, I think a theme of this season, and one of the better parts of the season, has been most of the best players have actually been out at clubs outside traditional elite. Look at Bournemouth. This actually illustrates another story.
Bournemouth this season.
Well, this is it. And so they have arguably the star manager. I'd say 80 to 90% likely in the summer. They're going to lose at least 4 players, and there is going to be a scramble for their manager. And he would have to, I think, he'd have to be really resistant not to go somewhere. And that just feels like Bournemouth. They finally are like a club that, the greatest moment in their history was really that rise through the divisions under Eddie Howe initially. Now it feels like they can do something more. And they've been given a taste of it, and it's already snatched away, which just feels, to me, is such a sad thing.
See, I think the conventional logic is, they're going to lose Kirkes, they're going to lose the centre-back, they're going to lose Semenyo as well, and probably the manager. The last 2 transfer windows... Now, somebody's been running a YouTube channel that lived and died by how many exciting transfers could you talk about?
Yeah.
Last summer, it was thin, watery gruel, and the winter was exactly the same as well. PSR has effectively stopped a lot of clubs going in and just casually snatching away these best players. I think if you were doing the Premier League team of the season, I'm really struggling to think of players who were bar maybe Salah, players who were Salah and Van Dijk, automatically in from the conventional big sides. I wouldn't have anyone from Arsenal in there. You would have 3 or 4 players from Bournemouth are in the conversation. Certainly Anthony Robinson at Fulham. Newcastle got about 5 or 6 shouts to get in there. And I think those are players who probably would have been playing for those clubs had it been a freer market to go and do it.
The biggest one there you touched on, everyone, literally, every major club wants Alexander Isak. Mikel Arteta would absolutely love him. Except they know that. And okay, this is partly because of the kind of the strength of Newcastle's ownership in that regard. But equally, they just don't have to sell, or at least they don't have to sell for anything that isn't a price that is kind of PSR change of the club. They'd want at least 150 million.
It's kind of a bit broken in a sense because in any other aspect of the economy, the fact that clubs weren't able to pay that kind of money would mean the values would just reduce. Nobody can afford 150 million on a centre forward. Ergo, Isak would be worth 50 million because that's just what the going rate would be. But it almost seems as an element of pride involved with it, that once transfers have got to a certain level, no fan would understand it going backwards, so they can't look to be taking what appears to be a small fee, even if it is perfectly reflective.
But I do think a big part of that is actually just wealth to the Premier League, in that given the amount that comes in through broadcasting revenue in a way that's incomparable in any other league, suddenly a fee of 70 million isn't necessarily as attractive as it used to be for a club like like Bournemouth. I mean, look at the business Brighton have made on such fees. And also, it's actually, and this is something that has really developed this season. It is worth getting into this now, I suppose. It's created this other race, which is basically a race in trying to make commercial revenue. And that's why suddenly we're seeing a spate of stories about how so many clubs in the Premier League want to build a new stadium. You know, Manchester United, Newcastle United, Chelsea, Arsenal looking at expansion. Obviously, they all look at Tottenham Hotspur example. And there's suddenly this kind of this race to create other commercial revenue to give more PSR headroom. The biggest example of this, of course, being Chelsea selling their women's team to themselves.
That's not the biggest example of this. If you could see my Klarna bill for Adidas this season with all the Newcastle United stuff coming out, I'd say it's comparable to what Chelsea valued their women's team at. You would openly weep if I showed you that. And I'm not the only one there. What did Chelsea end up? Did it come out as over 100 million? Or something?
Yeah, I mean, so the team was valued at 150 million, which gave them now. There has been a surprise expressed that in football, given that
I'm expressing it right now.
Yeah, yes. The most valuable women's team in the world is LAFC. They are 190 million, and that's in America, where women's football is much more commercially successful. Chelsea are probably facing up to what looked maybe severe breaches of PSR that could have brought points deductions. Instead, they're in the clear. Now we're going to see what happens with UEFA, because UEFA don't allow these sales like this to feature the PSR. And this is where it's really interesting, because, of course, so the EFL don't allow it because there was a spate of EFL clubs doing similar 3 years ago. UEFA don't allow it. The Premier League could see this coming. They could see the loophole. They tried to stop it. But because the Premier League is self-governing, where basically 20 clubs make essentially every single major decision, there are big questions of whether that's good for governance. And right now in the Premier League, they're finding an increasing struggle to get decisions through, because there's so much infighting among clubs. So in this case, 11 clubs will have to back the Premier League and basically disallow this loophole, whereas 9 didn't. And so you can only assume that 9 actually are thinking for themselves, well, maybe we can avail this in the future. Or it might have been down to some other politics like...
Well, do we know who the 11 and the 9 were?
I've been told some of the names, but not enough. This is where we are responsible. Not enough to cross the journalistic threshold.
I suppose the safe question to ask is, without having to name the clubs, would you say that there's an obvious consistent between the 9 and a consistent between the 11? Or is it really random?
From the names I've been told so far, it's actually much more... Because recently in the Premier League, a lot of these decisions have gone down this kind of line of... There's a block of 4 on major regulatory issues, like PSR, which is basically Manchester City, Newcastle United, both have similar kind of state-linked ownerships, Villa, and Nottingham Forest. So they've formed a block of 4. Sometimes Leicester vote with them in certain issues. Chelsea have recently voted with them on certain issues. That's changed now.
I love how much it just sounds like 20 people from school who sometimes get on and sometimes don't.
But this is it. I mean, like, I was talking to someone who works within kind of like football legal political circles at quite a high level in European football last week, and they were talking about how this is one of the potential threats to the Premier League, because for 25 years, really close to 30 years, it was a very unified thing. Essentially, they all saw this thing is making so much money.
Don't rock the boat. Let's all just go in the same direction.
And Richard Scudamore was very good at kind of always bringing agreement. And this was at the height of the era when there was a big 6, and they saw themselves as the ones that brought value, which created other issues. Now, in that context, people do criticise the new chief executive, or he's not new anymore, he's there for a few years, but the current chief executive, Richard Masters, against Scudamore because he's not as good as Carling clubs together. I think that's unfair, because I think Scudamore got out before, as he saw that these problems were beginning to build, and I don't think any chief executive would necessarily be able to kind of weather the politics involved between the owners right now, which are worse than they've ever been. And this is it. Like, so, yeah, but
this is so mad, though.
I know.
Basically, the implication is the difference between Richard Masters and Scudamore is that Masters is less good at standing at a table and going, guys, come on.
Yeah, well, especially, and it's not just guys, it's when usually he's standing at a table in front of a load of lawyers. That's what it is now.
Legal guys, come on.
So like and this is exactly what it comes down to. With the Premier League's great strength used to be this unity of purpose to ensure we all make a load of money.
Yep.
Whereas now, I'm about to say something. I'm not sure we can get this past the lawyers, but we'll ask them.
We've got a really funny gimmick for if we say something we can't.
Someone gave me a great parallel last week. He's not saying the Premier League is a drugs cartel. He's likening it to a drugs cartel where drugs. There's a period where, like, anyone who's seen the Narcos or the Wire season 4 or 5 will know about this, but there's a period where they create a co-op, they come together, and they all realize it's better for business if we work together. But after a while, basically, just there's too many competing interests, and that's why that was the kind of analogy put to me, that basically there's too many of the partners looking in different directions, and hence the thing is starting to come apart. Maybe I should put that on a more legally safe way in case it has to be cut. But basically, yes, the Premier League used to have this immense unity of purpose. Now it suddenly has a range of owners looking in different directions, looking in different interests. A lot of them looking beyond the traditional structures of football and wanting an almost globalised football. And this is feeding into another theme of this season, which has been multiple protests over ticket prices.
Don't get me started.
And this is another thing. Like, I don't think there's ever been a season with as much fan agitation since the Super League.
Yeah.
And that does speak to something else going on here.
The ticket price situation is just, no matter what level of football you follow your team at, but if it is the Premier League, the conversations you've had with your friends, with your family, with the people you go with yourself over and it really does feel like you may have this conversation every now and then, but it feels like every single game now, most fans are having to sit there and go, can I justify this? And yet, every week, enough people do that the stadium is full.
I have to say, anytime, I've been working as a working journalist for like almost 20 years now. So kind of lamentably moved away from basically because the job is going to games every week. But I do marvel anytime I'm on a train up north and like the train is absolutely jammed. And these are not like whatever about the actual season ticket price. Those trains.
The trains? Never mind the trains.
They're so expensive. Like the commitment from people, the investment is incredible. And this does feed into something else here that really ties into exactly what we're talking about. So there is a suspicion, I think it's a very fair suspicion, from a lot of fan groups, from a lot of people who work with these owners, that ultimately a lot of them basically just want to gradually dilute season tickets and create more one-off tickets that they can sell for 400 quid, like an NBA game. Essentially, a tourist fan goes for one game, pays that, spends 200 to 300 quid in the mega store.
Well, that's exactly it. It's not the ticket price. The problem I always have with it is if and you know it yourself, you've been on holiday. If there's a team you want to see, I've been to NBA games. You spend a lot more time in the stadium. You want your commemorative cap. You want a bit of merchandise. If there's a restaurant on site, maybe you'll eat there because it's part of the experience. You compare that to 4 or 5 blokes who've had a season ticket next to each other for 30 years, and they go at the same pub round the corner 30 minutes before kick-off, and they go at the same pub round the corner afterwards. They have the tea when they get home. They've got the routine absolutely sorted. They maybe bought one replica kit 15 years ago. They don't bother with a tat. They're just going for a nice time because it's part of their routine. You compare that to somebody flying in from the other side of the world.
Yeah.
It's a one-off, life-changing experience for them. That ticket is worth 4 or 5 times more to them because of how rare it is.
Yeah.
And the other money they'll invest in. You scale that up to 10,000 people, to 20,000 people, half a stadium. You're talking millions over a year, and
isn't there a self-perpetuating irony to that, and potentially a kind of almost a self-defeating aspect? Whereas, because what are a lot of actually tourist fans
going
what
for? The atmosphere, the environment,
exactly. And the more that you have, like that's become a massive problem with Barcelona. So yeah, the more that you have, the more it dilutes it, and then suddenly also there's this issue about kind of what does the next generation do?
Is there anything that can sort of like, I don't want to say make it more normal in the end, but what are you expecting to happen off the pitch between now and the end of the season? It's sort of like, no, just to give you an easy question, what fixes it?
No, you just say made it more normal. And then about what happens after, well, what's likely to happen off the pitch? The outcome of the Manchester City case. Potentially the most seismic moment in in football history.
And if I could just push you there, Miguel, for 1 second, what is going to be the outcome of the Manchester City case?
I mean, look, it's genuinely the information coming out of this has been so watertight.
Oh God, it's been. I'm astounded you don't hear more about this.
But even on a basic, but I think that's because of everyone knows the stakes. And even say if you look back to the UEFA case 5 years ago when City initially got a 2-year ban. And then that was overturned.
That gets totally forgotten about.
Yeah.
People going like that never happened. They were banned for 2 years.
But that was, I mean, I suppose people don't talk about it in that way because it was overturned at CAS, and it was overturned because a lot of key evidence was time barred, particularly on the Etisalat deal that's been actually part of the headlines lately.
That's almost as fortunate as discovering your women's football team is worth 4 times what it probably is.
But on that, I think what people also mention a lot less is, or even less than that, is that in 2014, a lot of the same information if not, although obviously not including the kind of the stuff that came out with football leagues. In 2014, on the information that was presented to UEFA, well, both Manchester City and Paris Saint-Germain, they ended up going in. They ended up having to agree settlements with UEFA to avoid bigger punishments. And again, this is the road to that actually came out in football leagues as well, about all this sort of talk of legal threats. It was like with some of the most famous lines about like, oh, we'll spend 50 million on the best, or 30 million on the 50 best lawyers in the world, whoever it was, and in the road to that. That's something that gets overlooked. As regards whether this actually,
I was going to say, is that settlement is that something that's on the table for this, or are we expecting? Is that not even being
from what? Well, I mean, what we have to see, I suppose, crucially, and this is where like everything we say has to be caveated with the fact that none of this is proven. City insists on their innocence. If the charges, but this is it basically. We don't know if the charges have been proven. From what you hear, though, if there was going to be a settlement, it would have come much earlier. I think there was a point in the last 18 months where at least a rump of clubs want to try and bring this to close. A rump of clubs, yeah. But there are some clubs who basically are pushing. If charges are proven, they want City expelled. Like the strength of feeling is that much. That's not universal now.
From the Premier League or gone
from certain clubs,
right?
Oh, sorry, as in like expel. So in that case, if it came to that, I don't think it will. I don't think enough clubs would support it.
Be funny though, and not like funny in the sense of like that's a shame for the fans, but just like teams have got that sort. That's one of the most bizarre things that would ever happen.
It would
football.
have to. I don't have actually the exact details to hand, but there would have to be, I think, another special vote after that. Again, if City, if the most serious charges are proven, but yeah, it would be. It wouldn't just be it'd be expulsion from the Premier League. You're out of the Premier League. But then that doesn't mean you go into the EFL. The EFL would have to choose to take the team,
which they would.
Would they though? If you're one of the championship clubs, you're thinking, well, hang on a second, this wrecks our chances.
I didn't say the championship.
Oh well, yeah.
I think the EFL would take them.
But then there's the same situation, because then what do you do with the numbers of promotion relegation? And if the EFL don't take them, then you're talking about into non-league. Now we are getting ahead of ourselves here.
Just a little bit, but it's fun.
I use a talk of time there because it's a funny one. I mean, so for the last 3 months, I'd say I've been hearing, well, at least since late January, I've had people saying, yeah, the outcome's imminent. That word feels like it means less.
Not wearing a watch currently, but that does feel distinctly unimminent.
And now suddenly there's just talk that's risen in the past 2 weeks. It might actually still be months.
It's like they're trying to buy a house here, isn't it?
It's. I mean, I was speaking to someone who worked on the UEFA investigation the other day, and they said that hearing took place in about over at most 2 days, and it was then I think that was around January 2020. The outcome came out Valentine's Day, February 2020. So like that is fairly
It's a model of efficiency.
Whereas the Premier League, I mean, let's not forget. So that because they're based in the same leagues. So like UEFA had it done within less than a year and a half of those initial leaks which came out in November 2018. The Premier League is now going on almost 7 years, which is a remarkable. And that's after the announcement of the charges.
Wow.
It's over 2 years now. I suppose with the City case, if the most serious charges are proven, in fact, really, actually, you would think no matter the outcome, there'll probably be an appeal either way. That could go
another 5 or 6 years.
I wouldn't go that long, but I think it could go into next season.
Oh, God.
And then this is now football's current, and we've got all sorts of other issues. So another one just to tack onto this, right.
Another thing I hate
when it's over. So we've got the Club World Cup.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
Have you seen that trophy?
Oh, it's great. It's
lovely.
It's got a key.
Beautiful, I think. Actually, I've got a question about this.
Yeah.
I've got a question about this. They've announced the prize money.
Yeah.
Right? It's something ridiculous, like 125 million or like 100 million pounds.
Yeah.
Something like that. If you win that Club World Cup, does that effectively absolve you of PSR problems?
That's exactly it. So this is why...
So all of a sudden it's now the highest stakes game in football.
Even though it doesn't feel like there's much fan interest in this, but that's exactly it. And this is why there's even more politics about this. Because, if Chelsea or Man City... I don't think they even need to win it. If they go relatively far, I think they can get up to $90 million. Now that's
literally game changing.
Yeah, that's a big signing, basically. I think like that's what it equates to. So this has been a lot of other Premier League clubs are going, well, hang on, what's going on here? B, there's been a new row or argument because the two clubs obviously they only get back if they get to the final. the Club World Cup ends on the 13th of July. The Premier League starts, I think it's about 4 weeks later, the weekend of 16th of August. Naturally, they would like more space. But the Premier League is like, because the Premier League are already very irritated about having this Club World Cup unilaterally imposed upon them. So for all the Premier League might have issues with the Champions League expansion, they were at least consulted in the process. So they were stakeholders involved. FIFA basically just put this on top of the calendar. So the Premier League are basically, well, hang on, why would we help FIFA's competition? Or there's no obligation to be in it. So the Premier League have absolutely said no to any extension for clubs. They're going to go as normal. But I think this is where we get into some of these potentially bigger topics that I touched on earlier, and this is really worth another pod. Although there's an agreement now for the FIFA Club World Cup to be every 4 years, what's going to happen when you have that sort of money on the table? There's naturally going to be agitation. Well, maybe we should have this every 2 years. Maybe should we expand it to 48 teams? Because everyone's going to want that money. And I do think it's the start. And this is where the point about kind of the Premier League versus the Champions League, say, is so relevant.
We've actually brought this background brilliantly for the least structured podcast I've ever been on. We've actually done a really good job here.
But I think this is worth another podcast. I think this is the start of this next year with 2 major tournaments in America is going to be the start of properly globalized football, where the big club teams start to play more.
So what you're saying is the solution again is money.
Yeah, well,
they fixed the Club World Cup by making it about more money, and all these other clubs we can fix football. We can bring everybody back together.
Just this
endless, just make some more money.
Endless race.
Well, one small bit of brevity we did say we were going to end on. You wanted to talk about like what are the actual best Premier League seasons, and you've got 3. And I've got 3, and then we wanted your 3 as well. You sitting there watching or listening to this. So, what do you think makes a good Premier League season?
I think obviously you've got to have a title race that goes a distance,
a proper title race,
and it goes to the last day.
Goes to the last day.
Yeah. Also, at least one other thing has to go to the last day, which I would say is probably the relegation battle. Although you'd also take Champions League in there, and I think that's happened very rarely. Like, it's the equivalent happened in 94, 95, in 95, 96, in 2011, 12. So I think they're generally cast as among the best Premier League seasons. But I think you've also got to have a bit more. You want a driving story or a major controversy, which is
an overarching story arc.
Yeah, I think so. Which, I mean, like, so it's like, sorry to bring this up, but the classic 95-96, that is, but like this,
it's a classic for a reason.
Yeah.
But whether I like it or not,
and I'm not advocating star footballer jumping into the crowd to kick a fan. But when you think about the sensation of the Cantona incident the year before,
Well,
and
obviously made his return that season. You had returning guest stars, big characters coming back in. It's how they write television.
So I would actually, it's quite interesting now because 94, 95, 95, 96, they're almost considered a point because the Premier League wasn't properly internationalised. It still felt like the old First Division rather than necessarily fully Premier League.
Yeah.
But I think they had so much drama in them, and so it was so important to creating the lore of the Premier League that I would have those 2 up there. You'd probably go maybe 11, 12 up there for the way it ended, regardless of kind of questions and debates about the ownership that I've written a lot on this website. The Leicester one is... Well, actually, I'll let you go into yours.
I think the Leicester one should be in there. Yeah. I know the title race did not go at the last day, and I top of my head couldn't even tell you what happened with the relegation battle. Leicester weren't in it, which was the big sort of shock for everybody. That was the last time you really looked at it and you thought, do you know what? Anything can happen.
Do you know who went down that season?
Seems to be none of my business, actually, that one. But it was the last time you looked at it and you thought, do you know what? Anything actually can happen in this division. Like we got so comfortable talking about the Big Four and then the Big Six, and these clubs dominated the top of the league every single year. And yes, don't get me wrong, Leicester didn't get 100 points. They didn't take on a side that would otherwise have won. I think it was the lowest championship winning points total
in years.
Anyway, it was like 82 or something. Really, barely get you into the top 3 now. Like Liverpool were getting 97, 98 points and coming second. But it was just sort of like, if the timing is right, if the stars align, if you somehow magically stumble across N'Golo Kante before Chelsea and Arsenal do, and turns out Jamie Vardy should never have been playing at Tamworth. He was actually an England-level centre-forward. And Riyad Mahrez, you found him from complete obscurity as well. And for 1 year, you get a team together and you get motivated, and it's a part of the world that has not had major footballing success in forever.
There's a crucial point down to what makes the season as well. So, because you mentioned 18-19 and like City and Liverpool get 97-98. People go on about how good that was. I'm sure, yes, it was great in terms of like this is the highest quality we've seen. I think that was bad in terms of drama because they did get to a point about 5 games from the end where you think, well, they're both just going to win every game. And I don't think actually the title race or the top spot ever changed. So what you need in a race as well is actual proper...
Oh, people
twists.
ahead, falling back. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I would have had... Was it 18-19 went down the last day? I would have had that in there purely because I can remember watching the last day in a bar and they had 2 enormous screens of identical size that you could see. Like the bar's, it's a very sort of oblong-shaped room.
Yeah.
And you could just see both games. And they had somebody behind the bar just basically mixing the audio. Yeah. So whenever something was happening,
Right,
you would just have you would just constantly going across them. And that's one of the best neutral fan experiences on one game I've ever had.
It's purely speaking as a journalist, actually. It's always an interesting one to go when you have that sort of situation. In some ways, the worst place you can be is at the stadium because there's that danger you're suddenly at the wrong game.
I'll tell you what's ruined that as an experience as well. The internet.
Yeah.
Because think about the night when things went down the last day in the 90s and somebody had a radio.
Yeah, the transistor radio.
And it would filter through the crowd somehow.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Well, we're getting slightly off topic here. We forgot the cameras on. So if you'd like to tell us your best Premier League seasons and specifically what makes a very good Premier League season, we'll do something with that.
Well, I suppose for the moment, they can tweet us, leave comments on YouTube.
Yeah, where can they get you on Twitter, Miguel?
Yeah, Miguel Delaney.
And get me
or Blue Sky, actually, given...
it's really good there. And I keep calling it.
And we are 8, we better say as well, actually.
Yes, I need to sign up for that, which I probably should have just pretended I had and then done it immediately after recording, so it looked like I'd done it in advance. But obviously, the independent socials will be across the screen somewhere, and you can subscribe to ACFC, which is the new YouTube channel, which I've just broken the thing for right at the end of the episode. Miguel, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank
you for joining us. We may come back next time with actual structure, which will be a real treat for you. But until then, it's goodbye from him.
Good luck.
See? Blinding chemistry. Goodbye.